I can't tell you how many times people have asked what came out of my mouth the second I stepped into that house. Some expect me to say I lost control, started yelling, or turned the whole place upside down. The truth isn't nearly that dramatic. I barely said a word. Still, before the sun came up the following morning, I'd made a decision about my son that most folks would probably call ruthless. I don't see it that way. To me, it was simply something that had to be done. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 66 years old, and my wife, Rebecca, and I have shared our lives together for over 3 decades. Until less than 2 weeks ago, if someone had asked me about my family, I would have said we were strong. We weren't flawless, no family is, but we had built something dependable over many years. That kind of stability doesn't happen overnight. It's earned through sacrifices, long workdays, countless bills nobody thanks you for paying, and continuing to love people even when they make that difficult. Our son, Ethan, is 34 now. He's grown into a big man with a respectable career and the kind of confidence people notice. I'd be lying if I claimed I had nothing to do with his success. More than once, I opened doors that would have stayed shut if my name hadn't been attached to his. That's important later. A little over 3 years ago, Ethan married Megan, a genuinely pleasant woman who always treated us kindly. I never had an issue with her. Her parents, though, were another story. Her father, Victor Collins, struck me the wrong way from the very first handshake. Sometimes your instincts whisper something before your brain catches up, and mine warned me to keep one eye on him. I ignored that feeling because my son was happy, and I didn't want to be the father who judged too quickly. Looking back now, I wish I'd listened. About 12 days ago, I flew to Charlotte, North Carolina, for a string of business meetings. Traveling wasn't unusual for me. I probably made 4 or 5 work trips every year, and everyone in the family knew the routine. Rebecca knew exactly when I was leaving, and Ethan did too. What nobody expected, including my wife, was that my final appointment got canceled unexpectedly. Instead of wasting another day in a hotel, I figured I'd surprise Rebecca by coming home early. Even after all those years together, I still enjoyed catching her off guard with little surprises. I never called. I never texted. I just booked the earliest flight I could find, picked up my suitcase after landing, and drove straight toward home. It was just after 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. Now, here's the detail that stayed with me from the very beginning. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a dark blue Lincoln SUV parked in my driveway. It belonged to Victor. He treated that thing like it was part of his identity, so there was no mistaking it. The uneasy feeling I'd experienced years earlier came rushing back almost immediately. I tried talking myself out of it. Maybe they had stopped by for lunch. Maybe Ethan invited everyone over. Families visit each other all the time. There was nothing strange about that. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Still, something felt off. I grabbed my bag, walked up to the front door, and stepped inside. Before I even saw anyone, I heard the noise. From somewhere toward the kitchen came cheerful laughter, dishes clinking together, casual conversation, and the relaxed sounds of people enjoying themselves without a single concern in the world. But the living room was completely silent. Not peaceful, not comfortable. The kind of silence that makes your stomach tighten before your mind even understands why. I eased the door shut behind me and looked toward the couch. That's when I saw Rebecca. She wasn't sitting comfortably. She wasn't resting. She was slumped against the front of the sofa with both legs stretched awkwardly across the floor. One hand was pressed beneath her nose, and there was a dark red stain spreading across the front of her cream-colored blouse. The instant I recognized it was blood, my heart seemed to drop straight into my stomach. Rebecca looked up the moment I entered. I've watched that woman cry over sentimental movies. I've seen tears roll down her cheeks during weddings, family reunions, and even songs that reminded her of her late mother. But I'd never seen the expression she gave me that afternoon. It wasn't panic. It wasn't fear alone. It looked like relief, as though she'd been holding herself together by sheer determination, waiting for me to walk through that door. The second our eyes met, I could almost see the tension leave her face. That image has never left me. Even now, despite everything that happened afterward, that's still the picture I remember first. I didn't waste time asking questions. Panic has never solved anything, and I've never been the kind of man who freezes when someone needs help. My suitcase hit the floor behind me as I dropped to one knee beside my wife and immediately dialed 911. While the dispatcher calmly guided me through everything I needed to do, checking Rebecca's pulse, keeping her awake, and helping stop the bleeding. I gently wiped the blood from her face with my hand. And through all of it, I could still hear laughter coming from the kitchen. My own son, Victor, his wife, Elaine. They carried on talking and laughing as though they were enjoying an ordinary afternoon meal, completely unaware, or perhaps unwilling to care, that Rebecca was only a few rooms away fighting to stay conscious. That realization settled inside me like ice. It was in that moment I knew nothing about our family would ever be the same again. The paramedics hadn't even finished loading Lauren into the ambulance when I turned back toward the kitchen. Every step felt heavier than the one before it, but my mind was strangely clear. The panic had burned itself out, leaving something colder behind. When I reached the doorway, nobody was talking anymore. The plates were still on the table. Half-empty glasses of iced tea sat exactly where they'd been a few minutes earlier. The television in the family room was still playing some baseball game no one was watching. My son, Ryan, stood near the table with his hands shoved into his pockets. Across from him, his father-in-law, Howard Bennett, stared at the floor instead of looking at me. His wife, Carol, kept twisting a napkin between her fingers. No one wanted to be the first to speak. I looked at each of them before saying a single word. Somebody tell me why my wife was lying on the living room floor while the three of you were eating lunch. The silence stretched. Howard finally cleared his throat. Daniel, this wasn't supposed to happen. I nodded once. I didn't ask what was supposed to happen. Ryan shifted his weight. Dad, Mom got upset. Those 4 words hit me harder than they probably sounded. People don't just get upset. There's always a reason. What upset her? I asked. Ryan looked toward Howard. That told me everything before anyone answered. Howard leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and tried to sound reasonable. We were discussing an investment opportunity. I almost laughed. An investment opportunity. That's the kind of phrase people use when they don't want to admit they're talking about someone else's money. What kind of investment? Howard hesitated. Ryan answered instead. He wanted me to buy into one of his developments. I looked at him. With what money? Another pause. Howard finally spoke. I figured it was time Ryan became more involved with the family business. The Bennett family business, I corrected. He gave me a tight smile. Eventually, it's all family. No, I said quietly. It isn't. The room went silent again. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. Dad, you don't understand. I've understood business longer than you've been alive. Nobody argued with that. Howard reached for a folder lying on the table. There are projections, contracts. I raised my hand. Leave it. He stopped moving. I'm not signing anything. I continued. Neither is my son today. Ryan looked surprised. I'm not. I turned toward him. The fact that you're asking me that tells me you weren't ready to sign anything in the first place. His face fell. Howard wasn't ready to quit. Daniel, you're making this emotional. No, I replied. You made it emotional when you kept talking after my wife walked away feeling sick. Carol finally spoke for the first time. We thought she just needed a minute. I looked directly at her. Did either of you go check on her? She didn't answer. I already knew why. Because the answer was no. Ryan swallowed hard. I was going to. But you didn't. No. You heard her say she wasn't feeling well. Yes. You knew she'd been dealing with high blood pressure. He nodded. I did. And you stayed here. Another nod. Every answer hurt more than the last. Not because I was learning something new. Because every sentence confirmed exactly what I'd feared when I walked through that front door. My son hadn't made one terrible decision. He'd made a dozen small ones in a row. Howard stood up. I think everyone needs some time. I looked at him. You've had enough of my time. His jaw tightened. I don't appreciate your tone. I couldn't help smiling. That's unfortunate. He picked up the folder. I'll leave. I know you will. Carol hurried after him without another word. The front door closed. The house became quiet again. Just me and Ryan. He sat down slowly, staring at the scratches in the wooden tabletop. I messed up. Those were the first honest words I'd heard all afternoon. You did. I wasn't thinking. I know. I never thought she'd. His voice broke before he could finish. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. When you were 8 years old, I said, your mother stayed awake for 3 nights because your fever wouldn't come down. He looked up. When you broke your arm riding your bike, she slept in a chair beside your hospital bed. He blinked several times. When you lost your first job, who convinced you not to give up? Mom. When your marriage hit a rough patch last year, Who spent hours on the phone making sure you two work things out? He whispered the answer. Mom. I nodded slowly. Today she needed one person to notice she wasn't okay. He covered his face with both hands. And nobody did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Sometimes disappointment carries farther than anger ever could. Outside, I heard the ambulance pull away. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I stood. I'm going to the hospital. Ryan looked up. Can I come? I thought about it for several seconds. You can. Hope flickered across his face. But not with me. It disappeared just as quickly. Right now, I said. Your mother needs peace more than she needs apologies. Whether she decides to see you later, that's her choice. He nodded without arguing. For the first time that day, I thought he finally understood that some mistakes don't disappear the moment you say you're sorry. Some of them stay in the room long after everyone else has gone home. The drive to St. Andrew's Medical Center took less than 15 minutes. It felt like an hour. I don't remember a single traffic light. I couldn't tell you what songs came over the radio or how many cars passed me on the highway. My hand stayed at 10 and 2 the entire trip, gripping the steering wheel hard enough that my knuckles turned pale. My mind kept replaying the same picture. Rebecca sitting on that living room floor. The blood on her blouse. The laughter coming from the kitchen. Some memories don't fade. They loop. By the time I parked, the ambulance had already arrived. I hurried through the emergency entrance, gave the receptionist my wife's name, and she pointed me toward a quiet waiting area while the doctors finished evaluating her. Hospitals have their own rhythm. Phones ring. Shoes squeak across polished floors. Machines beep somewhere behind closed doors. Nobody raises their voice, but somehow every conversation feels important. I sat down for exactly 30 seconds before standing again. Then I paced. Saturday. Stood. Walked to the coffee machine. Changed my mind. Walked back. Waiting has never been one of my strengths. About 20 minutes later, a physician stepped through the double doors. He looked to be in his early 50s with silver at his temples and tired eyes that suggested he'd been delivering difficult news for a long time. Mr. Mercer? I nodded. I'm Dr. Nolan. He extended his hand. I shook it. How is she? He smiled, and it was the first real breath I'd taken all afternoon. She's stable. That single word loosened a knot in my chest I hadn't realized was there. Her blood pressure was dangerously elevated, he continued. Fortunately, she received treatment before it caused permanent damage. I closed my eyes for a second. Will she recover? We expect a full recovery. Those 5 words nearly brought me to tears. Instead, I simply thanked him. Over and over. Dr. Nolan glanced toward the hallway before speaking again. There's something I'd like to ask. Of course. Was there a significant emotional event before this happened? I looked down at the floor. Yes. You don't have to tell me the details. I appreciate that. He folded his hands. Stress alone usually doesn't create a crisis like this. It builds on existing conditions. If she's been under pressure for weeks, or even months, it can eventually overwhelm the body. Weeks. Months. That word stayed with me. Months. Had I missed something? Had Rebecca been carrying more than she'd ever admitted? I thought back over the last several months. There had been little things. She'd seemed more tired. She'd started waking up before dawn. Sometimes I'd catch her staring out the kitchen window with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in her hands. Whenever I asked if something was bothering her, she'd smile. I'm fine. That's what she'd always say. I'm fine. After 35 years of marriage, I should have known those words didn't always mean what they sounded like. Dr. Nolan rested a hand on my shoulder. She'll be able to see you in a few minutes. Thank you. He nodded and disappeared back through the doors. I sat down again. This time I stayed seated. For the first time all day, the anger started giving way to something else. Regret. Not because of what I'd said to Ryan. Because I wondered how much my wife had been protecting me from. Rebecca had always been the peacemaker. If someone was unhappy, she'd quietly absorb it. If 2 people argued, she'd find a way to smooth things over. She carried everyone's burdens like they belonged to her. Maybe she'd been carrying too many. A nurse appeared. Mr. Mercer? Yes. You can come back now. She led me through a maze of hallways until we reached a private room. Rebecca looked exhausted. The oxygen had been removed, but she still had an IV in her arm. When she saw me, she managed a tired smile. There you are. I laughed softly. I wasn't planning on being anywhere else. I pulled a chair beside her bed and took her hand. It felt warmer than it had earlier. That alone made me feel better. I'm sorry, she whispered. I frowned. For what? For ruining your trip. I stared at her. Even after everything she'd been through, she thought she owed me an apology. I squeezed her hand. Rebecca. She looked at me. You never have to apologize for needing me. Her eyes filled with tears. I tried to keep everyone calm. I know. I didn't want Ryan caught in the middle. You weren't the one who put him there. She looked toward the window. I think Howard has been filling his head for a while. I stayed quiet. I didn't realize how much until today. There it was again. Not one afternoon. Not one conversation. This had been building. Little by little. Conversation after conversation. Suggestion after suggestion. Howard hadn't been trying to convince Ryan overnight. He'd been planting seeds. Rebecca seemed to read my thoughts. He always tells Ryan he's capable of bigger things. There's nothing wrong with that. No. She sighed. But then he tells him you're old-fashioned. I didn't respond. He says your way of doing business belongs to another generation. I smiled faintly. I suppose every generation thinks that. Rebecca shook her head. That's not the part that worried me. What did? He kept telling Ryan that successful men don't wait for opportunities. I listened carefully. They take them. The room became very quiet. Rebecca looked down at our joined hands. I think Ryan started believing that everything should come faster. I nodded slowly. That sounded more like the son I'd been watching over the past year. Not cruel. Not selfish. Impatient. Someone had convinced him that patience was weakness. That earning something slowly meant you were falling behind. I leaned closer. Did Howard ever ask you directly for money? She hesitated. Then she nodded. Twice. I blinked. What? The first time was about 6 months ago. Why didn't you tell me? I handled it. Rebecca. I thought it was over. She smiled sadly. I guess I was wrong. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I made a quiet promise to myself. I wasn't going to spend the next few days arguing. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wanted the truth. Every conversation, every request, every lie. Because whatever had happened inside my house that afternoon hadn't started that morning. It had started long before I ever boarded a plane to Charlotte. And I intended to find out exactly when. I stayed with Rebecca until the nurses insisted she needed to rest. She fought to keep her eyes open every time I stood to leave, and every time I promised I'd still be there when she woke up. After a while, the medication finally won. Her breathing settled into a slow, steady rhythm, and the tension that had been etched across her face since I found her at home gradually disappeared. I sat there for another 10 minutes anyway. Sometimes you don't stay because someone needs you. Sometimes you stay because you're the one who isn't ready to walk away. When I finally stepped into the hallway, my phone vibrated. Ryan. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. Dad. His voice sounded nothing like it had a few hours earlier. The confidence was gone. What is it? I've been sitting outside the hospital. I looked through the glass doors at the end of the corridor. Sure enough, I could see his truck parked near the edge of the lot. I didn't want to come in without asking. That caught me off guard. For the first time all day, he wasn't assuming he had the right to something. I'll come outside. The evening air had cooled considerably, and the parking lot was almost quiet. Ryan was leaning against the side of his truck with his arms folded. He looked exhausted. He hadn't shaved. His shirt was still wrinkled from earlier. He looked older than he had that morning. I've been thinking, he said as I approached. I hope so. He nodded without taking offense. I keep replaying everything. So have I. He rubbed his forehead. I should have gone after Mom. Yes. I knew something wasn't right. Yes. He searched for the words. I kept thinking Howard would leave in a minute. I crossed my arms. And what if he didn't? Ryan didn't answer. You've spent your whole life believing there's always another minute, I said quietly. Sometimes there isn't. The words hung between us. I know. No, I replied. Today you finally learned. He looked away toward the hospital entrance. I don't even recognize myself. Neither did I. That was the part that hurt the most. The little boy who used to run across the yard because his mother called him for dinner had somehow become a man who ignored her asking for help. People don't change overnight. It happens one decision at a time, one compromise after another, one excuse that seems harmless until it isn't. Ryan broke the silence. Howard's been telling me for months that you never trusted me. I frowned. Is that what he said? He told me you kept control of everything because you thought I'd mess it up. I almost laughed. If I believed that, Why would I spend years teaching you the business? Ryan looked down. I don't know. Did you ever ask me? No. You just believed him? Another long pause. I guess I did. I nodded slowly. That's how manipulation works. He looked up. It doesn't start with a lie. He frowned. It starts with a doubt. The realization settled over him almost visibly. You let someone else explain your own father to you. His shoulders slumped. I did. And every time you chose his version instead of asking me, that distance between us grew a little wider. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. I was going to wait. What is it? I found this in my mailbox yesterday. He handed it to me. Inside was a typed proposal from Howard's company. It wasn't a contract. It was something worse. A business plan. Page after page explaining how Ryan could eventually leave our family company and join Howard's investment firm. There were projected salaries, bonus structures, profit percentages, even a timeline. At the bottom of one page was a handwritten note. You're ready to build something bigger than your father's legacy. I read it twice. Then I folded the papers carefully. So this wasn't about one conversation. Ryan shook his head. No. How long? I think. He swallowed. About 8 months. 8 months. While we'd been having Sunday dinners. While Rebecca baked birthday cakes. While I helped Ryan replace the roof on his house last spring. Someone had been quietly trying to convince my son that the life we'd built together wasn't enough. I handed the envelope back. Keep it. You don't want it. I've already read everything I needed to. Ryan looked confused. Howard wasn't trying to recruit you. He wasn't? No. I met his eyes. He was trying to compete with me. Ryan's expression slowly changed. You really think that's what this is? I've been in business for 40 years. I looked toward the hospital windows. Men like Howard don't always want more money. What do they want? They want to prove they're the smartest man in the room. Ryan stared at the papers in his hands. And I let myself become part of that. You did. His voice became almost a whisper. Can I fix it? I thought about Rebecca sleeping upstairs. About the doctors. About the last 8 months. Finally, I answered honestly. I don't know. He nodded. I appreciate you not lying. I won't lie to you. Not now. Not anymore. A security guard walked past us, giving a polite nod before continuing toward the entrance. Night had fully settled over the parking lot. Ryan shoved the envelope back into his jacket. I'm going to cut ties with Howard. I studied his face. Don't say it because you're standing outside a hospital. I'm not. Say it because you'll still mean it 6 months from now. He took a deep breath. I will. I believed he meant it. Whether he'd have the strength to follow through. That was another question entirely. As I watched him climb into his truck and drive away, I realized something important. The crisis that nearly took my wife had exposed a fracture in our family, but it hadn't created it. It had simply forced every hidden crack into the light. And once you've finally seen the damage clearly, pretending it isn't there is no longer an option. I didn't sleep that night. I went home sometime after midnight, but calling it going home didn't feel right anymore. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. The porch lights still glowed over the front steps. The flower beds Rebecca had spent years caring for were untouched. Even the wind chimes on the back patio sang the same soft tune every time the breeze picked up. Nothing had changed, except everything had. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence was almost overwhelming. Just 24 hours earlier, that same house had been filled with laughter. Now it felt like every wall had absorbed what happened and refused to let it go. Rebecca's reading glasses were still resting on the end table beside the couch. A half-finished crossword puzzle lay folded beside them. Her favorite blanket was draped over the armrest exactly where she'd left it that morning. I stood there longer than I should have. Then I walked into my office. For years that room had been where I solved problems. Contracts, budgets, negotiations. If something required patience and clear thinking, that's where I handled it. This time wasn't any different. I opened my laptop and started reviewing everything connected to our finances. Not because I suspected Rebecca, because I wanted to understand how deeply Howard had tried to insert himself into our lives. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then I noticed several emails Ryan had forwarded to me months earlier. At the time, I'd skimmed them without giving them much thought. Now I read every word. Howard had been sending articles about modern leadership, books about stepping out from under successful parents, podcast discussing why younger generations should break away from outdated family businesses. Individually, none of it meant much. Together, it painted a very different picture. He hadn't been attacking me directly. He'd been shaping Ryan's thinking one conversation at a time. A seed here, a suggestion there. Never enough to raise alarms. Just enough to slowly change the way my son saw the world. I leaned back in my chair. Manipulation rarely begins with demands. It begins with repetition. The same message delivered over and over until it starts sounding like your own opinion. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. I answered immediately. Hey. I woke up. How are you feeling? Tired. I'd be worried if you weren't. She laughed quietly. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh since everything happened. I miss home. I know. You should be here sleeping. I'll survive one night in an uncomfortable chair. You've always hated hospital chairs. I still do. Another small laugh. Then her tone changed. Did Ryan call you? He did. What happened? I debated how much to tell her. He finally started listening. There was a pause. I've been praying for that. Those words stayed with me after we hung up. Rebecca had never prayed for success, or money, or recognition. She prayed for people. Always people. The next morning I arrived at the hospital before sunrise. Rebecca looked stronger already. The color had started returning to her face, and the doctor was optimistic she'd be discharged within another day or two. As we talked, a nurse stepped into the room. Mr. Mercer? Yes. There's a gentleman downstairs asking if you'll speak with him. I frowned. Did he give his name? She nodded. Howard Bennett. Rebecca looked at me. I could see the concern in her eyes. You don't have to. I know. But I wanted to. Not to argue. To understand. I found Howard standing alone near the hospital cafeteria. He looked different than he had the day before. Less polished. More tired. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked like a man who wasn't completely sure of himself. Daniel. I nodded. What do you want? He took a slow breath. I owe you an apology. I waited. I pushed too hard. Yes. I never intended for Rebecca to get hurt. I believe you. He looked surprised. You do? I believe you didn't intend it. I stepped closer. But intention doesn't erase responsibility. He lowered his eyes. I can see that now. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. What is this? Everything. I looked at him. The proposals. The business plans. My notes. He swallowed. I don't want any part of it anymore. I didn't take the envelope. You should give that to Ryan. He won't answer my calls. Then maybe that's something you'll have to live with. His shoulders sagged. I thought I was helping him. No. You were trying to make him into someone who admired you more than he trusted the people who raised him. Howard closed his eyes for a second. I didn't realize how far things had gone. I think you did. He didn't argue. That silence told me enough. Before leaving, he looked at me one last time. Do you think he'll ever forgive me? I answered honestly. I don't know. He nodded once. I suppose I deserve that. As he walked away, I realized something. For months I'd seen Howard as the biggest problem. But standing there, watching him disappear through the hospital doors, I understood the real challenge wasn't him. People like Howard will always exist. They'll always offer shortcuts. They'll always promise faster success and easier victories. The real question is whether the people we love are strong enough to recognize those offers for what they truly are. And that was the question Ryan still had to answer for himself. Rebecca came home 2 days later. I thought walking through that front door would make everything feel normal again. It didn't. She moved a little slower than usual, and every few minutes I'd catch myself asking whether she needed water, another pillow, or a blanket. After the 5th time, she smiled and shook her head. Daniel. What? I'm going to be okay. I know. You don't look like you believe it. She wasn't wrong. Losing someone doesn't always happen. Sometimes you come close enough that your mind refuses to stop imagining what almost did. For the next week, I worked from home. Not because the office couldn't function without me. Because there are moments in life when business stops matching. This was one of them. Ryan called every day. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. It wasn't punishment. I simply needed time. So did Rebecca. On the 8th morning after she came home, she walked into my office carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed me one before sitting across the desk. I saw Ryan yesterday. I looked up. You did. He stopped by while you were picking up groceries. What happened? He apologized. I stayed quiet. He didn't make excuses. Good. He cried. That surprised me. Ryan hadn't cried in front of me since he was a teenager. Rebecca smiled softly. He said he finally understood that he spent months listening to someone who kept feeding his pride. I nodded. He asked if I thought you'd ever trust him again. And what did you tell him? She looked out the window for a moment. I told him trust isn't rebuilt with speeches. It's rebuilt with ordinary days. I smiled. That sounded exactly like her. No grand declarations. No dramatic lectures. Just quiet wisdom. She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. He's still our son. I know. He made a terrible mistake. I know. But don't let one day erase 34 years. Her words stayed with me long after she left the room. That afternoon I called Ryan. He answered before the second ring. Dad, can you meet me? When? Now. We met at a small diner we'd been visiting since he was 10 years old. Same cracked leather booths. Same waitress. Same homemade pie sitting in the display case by the register. Some places refused to change. Maybe that's why I picked it. Ryan arrived 5 minutes early. He looked nervous. Good. That meant he understood the conversation mattered. After we ordered coffee, neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I broke the silence. When you were 16, do you remember scratching my truck? His eyes widened. You remember that? I remember everything. I was terrified. I know. You didn't yell. No. You asked why I tried to hide it. He smiled faintly. I told you I thought you'd be disappointed. I was. His smile disappeared. But I was more disappointed that you thought you couldn't tell me the truth. Ryan stared into his coffee. I've been thinking about that all week. I figured. He nodded slowly. I spent months hiding things. Yes. Little things at first. I know. Then bigger things. I leaned back in the booth. That's how trust disappears. Not all at once. One secret. One lie. One silence at a time. Ryan looked me in the eyes. I'm done living like that. I believed he meant it. Whether he could keep that promise would take time. But for the first time in a long while, I saw something familiar in him. Not confidence. Not ambition. Humility. And that's a much stronger foundation. Before we left the diner, he reached into his jacket and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a single key. What's this? The storage unit. I frowned. What storage unit? The one Howard convinced me to rent. He looked embarrassed. I was planning to move equipment there before starting my own company. You changed your mind? He nodded. I terminated the lease this morning. I slipped the key back into the envelope. Why are you giving this to me? Because I don't want secrets anymore. We walked outside together. The autumn air felt different somehow. Lighter. Not because everything had been fixed. Because we had finally started fixing it. Over the following months, life slowly found its rhythm again. Rebecca recovered completely. She began taking shorter work days, spent more time in her garden, and laughed more than she had in years. Ryan worked harder than I'd ever seen him work. Not to impress me, to earn back the confidence he'd lost. He never asked for shortcuts again. As for Howard, we never became friends. We were polite when our paths crossed, but there was a distance between us that neither of us tried to erase. Some bridges can be repaired. Others are better left exactly where they collapsed. Looking back now, people still ask me what changed our family. Most assume it was the day my wife collapsed. They're wrong. That day didn't break us. It revealed everything we'd ignored for far too long. The real turning point came afterward, when each of us had to decide what kind of people we wanted to become. Rebecca chose forgiveness. Ryan chose accountability. And I chose something I should have understood years earlier. Protecting your family doesn't always mean shielding them from consequences. Sometimes it means allowing them to face those consequences, while reminding them that if they're willing to change, there's still a place waiting for them at the table. Not because they've earned perfection, but because they've earned another chance. And, in the end, that was worth far more than winning an argument.